Welcome back to Cancer Out Loud, the CancerCare podcast. My name is Christina Monaco, and I'm an oncology social worker here at CancerCare. Today, we're joined by Neema Philippe, a young professional who is now cancer-free. Thank you so much for joining us today, Neema.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, I'm so excited to have this conversation today. So, just to start, can you tell us a little bit about your life before cancer?
Yes. Before cancer, I was living in San Francisco. I had recently been laid off. I was working as a software engineer at a major rideshare company, and I was living with my partner of 7 years, just enjoying life and adjusting to job loss, which is hard, but hopeful that I was just going to get back into the job search and things would kind of just continue as they were.
Amazing. So, once you heard those words, you have cancer, can you tell us what that emotional experience was like for you and how your life changed?
Yeah, hearing those words, it's a really tough thing. I remember getting a phone call, and you're already on pins and needles as you go through testing prior to getting that phone call and starting to realize that, there's a possibility that you have cancer. And so that anxiety of not knowing, but then getting the phone call and hearing those words, I don't think you're ever ready for that. And so it was like one of those moments where your heart just sinks. Luckily, my mom was in town because she was there for just different testing that I had to do prior. And I remember one of the first things that the nurse I was speaking to said was, "Oh, is your mom around?" And I was like, "Oh, okay. You're not just giving me the, oh, it's all good. It's like, is someone there to support you as I continue this conversation?" And I remember going to sit next to my mom on the couch and putting it on speaker and just hearing those words, and being in a state of disbelief, but also feeling instantly overwhelmed because there's so much more that comes with that conversation as you're still focused on the words that you have cancer. And so I remember just opening up my laptop and opening up the notes section, and you're immediately going into, okay, how much do you know about this? And it's really strange to hear things about your body in such medical terms. And then to also be sitting there still thinking about some of the first words from that conversation. And then even when you hang up, you're kind of still like in disbelief. You're sitting there realizing that your life just changed instantly in such a drastic way, in a way that you weren't prepared for, in a way that you didn't imagine for yourself, especially sitting there as a 29-year-old, and then realizing that you're springing into action so soon. And that's a really overwhelming feeling for a lot of reasons.
Absolutely. So, you mentioned how overwhelming it was, partially because of your age, being a 29-year-old sitting in that seat. Can you tell us a little bit about the impact of your age and this stage on your cancer journey?
Yes, I think it was a huge part of my journey. One, you just don't expect it at such a young age. You hear a lot about cancer, and of course, it can affect all ages, but you just don't think it's going to affect you at that time in your life. And when you go into these testing centers and you're surrounded by a lot of women or people who just look a lot older than you, it also feels isolating and it just feels like you shouldn't be there. It feels like you shouldn't be having this experience. And between the isolation and also like where you're at in life and what that means for your current, but also your future, it's really hard to even make sense of. And I think that's something I struggled with because it just didn't make sense to me and I still had to deal with it. And I knew that a lot of people around me couldn't necessarily relate to that. So it was one of those things that even going into it, I had friends who were aware that I was going through this testing, but everyone was so hopeful because they just didn't have that in mind because it just seems like it was so far fetched. And then when it's a reality, you're just sitting there like, wow, this can happen. It can happen to anyone at any time. And then you have to move forward, but move forward with an entire new reality. And your previous life, was not that long ago. Not that long ago, you were doing things and looking at things in a certain way that now all of a sudden it's so different. And now all of a sudden you're dealing with the reality of the fact that life is not forever. You don't know what your story looks like, how long you'll be here, but it becomes so much more real because you're dealing with something that is life threatening. And so to deal with it at 29 was just heartbreaking because I was grieving so much. I was grieving my previous life because I knew it was going to change a lot. And I was grieving the future that I imagined because I knew that now I was going to be moving forward with this forever. And even going into medical appointments, you're seeing a bunch of medical professionals, and they're even, like, this is strange. You have no family history. You're young. You were healthy prior to this. They're so it doesn't feel good when it's like the people who are supposed to have more of these answers are also kind of looking at you like, how did this happen? And it's just something that I felt in every appointment I was going in and every waiting room I was sitting in. And then when I had to go home and, catch up with friends or try to fall into my routine, but also realize like I am now living with this and this is now a part of me and my story.
Absolutely. And you hit on so many key things there: the grief, the isolation, the uncertainty.
Yeah.
And as we kind of talk about those things, can you also tell us what treatments you were doing? And then how did you combat that isolation?
Yeah. So I started off, I was advised to start with chemotherapy. And going into that, I was told, it's a good idea to think about egg freezing because chemotherapy can affect your ovaries. And if I ever wanted to carry children in the future, it was almost like a somewhat of a safety net. And personally, I was somebody who always struggled with that choice of whether or not I wanted to have children. And then I was forced to make that decision so soon because my timeline for chemo was only a few weeks out. And so I pretty much had a weekend to make such a life changing decision as to whether or not I wanted to freeze my eggs. I chose to undergo egg freezing because I think it's important to just leave that possibility open. You never know what you may want in the future. And so to just have that almost gave me some peace through some of the uncertainty. And I remember having a very tight window of like 2 weeks for the egg freezing process. And the day after my egg retrieval, I was starting chemotherapy. And so
Wow.
there's a lot of feelings going into like meeting with the fertility doctor and them kind of like drawing chicken scratch of what your body looks like and what this treatment will look like and what we're trying to avoid versus the outcome we're trying to get. And then a lot of times you're still processing because you just found this out so recently. And then you also know that this is just the beginning and this is not even chemo. This is not radiation. This is not surgery. All of like the really heavy things that you think about when you think about cancer. And so I started with egg freezing and then I went into chemotherapy. My regimen was something called TCHP, and that was an aggressive form of chemotherapy that I really didn't know much about prior to being diagnosed. And I remember being on the phone with a nurse prior to starting, and she was giving me some things, just to be mindful of some possible side effects, some things that I can do for myself. And it's really scary because you almost want to like hang up the phone, but you can't because you need to know that information. And then you're like, okay, this is starting and this is real. And my body is about to experience some things that it, never could be prepared for. And you hear some of the worst. And that's important because you need to know what you're dealing with and what might happen. But it's really scary knowing that you kind of have to confront it anyway. And so I started with chemotherapy. I did 6 rounds of that, spaced out every 3 weeks. And then I had a lumpectomy surgery. So I didn't have a mastectomy. I just had a lumpectomy in my left breast. And healing from that was also hard. I think with every stage of the journey, you're kind of dealing with the emotions of that specific treatment. Going into chemotherapy, you're nervous about essentially what everyone calls this poison in your body. And you know that it can make you weak and thin and you lose your hair, which is also a really hard thing to confront as a woman. And then you also know that, okay, now I'm approaching surgery. My first surgery was cancer related. It was when I got my port placed. And so not having had many surgeries and knowing that now people were opening me up because we're trying to fight for my life was hard. And then healing from that was hard as well. And then knowing that there was more to come. So after my lumpectomy, I had radiation, which was every day for 6 weeks, well, 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. And I think at that point, I was a little tired of all of the treatments and healing from the treatments and seeing what it was doing to my body. And then to know I had to be somewhere every day, no matter what, was also really challenging because you just feel the weight of all that you're going through.
It's
I think
exhausting.
it's exhausting. And there's moments throughout your journey where it really hits you that you have cancer. Like, of course, you're told this, but there's different experiences that you undergo where it really registers like, oh, I'm doing this because there's something in my body that's trying to kill me. It's like, this is what we're doing to save my life. As painful as it is, as hard as it is, it's like, this is what is giving me the best chance at survival. And you have to keep going. And so I was preparing for radiation when I found out that I had to go on another form of like a lighter form of chemotherapy. And they told me I would have 14 sessions of that because after surgery, they felt that not everything, all the margins weren't cleared. So to know that I was facing radiation while also kind of facing a setback of now being put on another form of chemo when the chemo I went through was really aggressive and it really, really almost took me out. So mentally, that was hard to hear that you want to put me on another form of chemo,
Of
not
course.
knowing what to expect from that chemo and knowing that it would be 14 sessions. So it'd be a whole other year of going through this treatment. And so to also have overlapping forms of treatment happening can be a lot because you're very protective of your body in this space. And you're aware that a lot of things that are happening to your body are intense. And then you think, well, how much can one body hold, at one time while also still believing that this is what you have to do to keep living?
And to that point, how did you get to that point? I know in the past we've kind of used this imagery of drowning. How were you keeping your head above water while you were going through not just highs and lows, but all of them at one time?
Right. It was really hard. I hit my lowest of lows throughout my cancer journey, and uh, I realized that I this was not something that I could do alone. I knew that I needed support, and I witnessed, people go through this journey. I actually lost my dad to cancer, and he was somebody who was very private about his journey, but I was still aware that he was going through this. And I realized that it wasn't something I wanted to keep to myself because I knew that I needed more support than I had in me. It's such a drain to your energy. It really puts you in a low state mentally, physically, in all the ways. So to then also think that I had to take it on alone was just something I wasn't going to do. And so I reached out for help. I shared it with my friends. I shared it on social media. I went to my cancer center's social worker and I asked, what support is available, whether it's financial, whether it's a community support groups. And then I found CancerCare, which I am just so grateful for because I think for me that was a huge turning point in my journey. Prior to joining CancerCare, I was at my lowest. It was at the point where I was facing a lot of treatment. I was dealing with side effects. I was really just sad and depleted. And I was aware of how much I was putting on myself and how much I was also trying to shield from some of the people who were trying really hard to show up and support me. A lot of people, the reality is, a lot of people don't know what to do. It's a really tough thing to navigate, and they try, but no one was prepared for this. I was not prepared for this, and I couldn't put too much on one person or two people or this. And I knew I needed more support. And so once I had individual therapy where I was just able to express everything that was weighing on me and feel like this was dedicated time just for me. And to know that I had that to look forward to. Like there'd be really rough weeks, and I'm like, oh, but I have, on Wednesday, I get to talk to Christina, and that's going to be a release. So to know I had those scheduled sessions to just release and to feel and to not have to shield any of my thoughts or feelings for the sake of someone else's comfort was really freeing. And then to just lean on support when I used to always feel like I had to have the answers or I had to do it myself and I had to, just power through. It was also really freeing and peaceful because it was a reminder of like, you don't have to do life alone. You actually shouldn't do life alone. And in these moments where you're really in a time of need, allow the people who care and love you to support you and try their best. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. And it's been so wonderful working with you. And I know sometimes when we talk about self care, it can be a point of guilt just based on society. That's what they tell us, whoever they is in the world. But we
Yeah.
really internalize that. How did you get past that?
I think it's hard because you grow up and, me as a Black woman, I've seen so much of like my family members face some really tough times and just feel like you have to stay positive, you have to power through. You don't talk about the things that are really heavy and really intense and you just kind of keep going. And I did that for so much of my life and I think that, at times that is what you have to do. But I also knew with something like this, I didn't want to hold it all in because I felt like that was unfair to myself. I think I really started to look at how stress and withholding your emotions has an effect on your body. And I kind of wanted to be kinder to my body. And I was like, I have to release this, or else where does it go? It just stays within me. And that's not helpful to me or to anyone. Knowing that people want to help you and they don't always know how, it requires a certain vulnerability and that vulnerability is beautiful for both sides because it releases some things for you. And it's just like, this is what I need. This is helpful. This is not. And then it also makes it easier for them because sometimes people want to help and they don't know how. And so just like allowing yourself to release some of that control over having it all figured out or handling it all alone and being strong because we all know strong has many meanings, but a lot of times throughout your cancer journey people will talk about strength and all of that. And for a while I thought being strong was just powering through and trying to be unbothered or make it seem like I had it all figured out. And then I realized true strength comes from vulnerability and sharing that, hey, I'm not okay right now. I don't know when I will be okay. And this is what is helpful. This is what is not. And sometimes, not everyone can meet you there. And I think that's a really big part of the journey too, is sometimes the grief that comes with releasing people who are not helpful to you during this time. And that was something that I had to go through and grieve, but also found really valuable because at the end of the day, it's like you're carrying enough. You really do have to protect your space. And that also means sometimes refining your support system.
Absolutely. And you talking about grief is such a big part of this. You mentioned earlier grieving the future that you anticipated or that you
Right,
thought was going to be so sure.
right.
Can you say a little bit more about that journey and how you kind of moved through that?
Yeah. So being diagnosed at 29, I was 2 months shy of my 30th birthday, and I just imagined like 30s being, oh, you figured life out more, right? It's like you're more established. You have your routines, you know what works for you, you know what doesn't, and you're almost just excited to enter this new chapter, feeling like you figured life out to a certain extent, which is crazy in itself, but it's like you think that you know kind of what's coming and then realizing I'm entering my 30s with this heavy weight. And with that weight, I am now no longer sure of what that chapter looks like. Before I was like, okay, I've been living with my partner for 7 years. I was like, this is the person that I want to marry and be with. And I'm picturing a future of just continuing the life that we've already created. I'm picturing myself being able to travel freely, spend time with friends freely, and show up for family and in ways that I always have. And I'm just more thinking about career, love, friends, and then all of a sudden you're hit with this huge brick where it's like now you really have to focus on your health. And now you're like, oh, I'm entering year 30. And now I'm suddenly wondering, am I making it to 35? Am I making it to 40? And what are those years going to look like? I think a lot of times people are like, when they think about cancer, they think about active treatment. And that's a really huge part of it. But even when you're cancer free, you're not free of cancer, and cancer is something that is with you for life. So some of that grief was knowing that my entire future was going to look different because I was not going to be free of something so heavy. I can find ways to better manage it and deal with it, but it was always going to be a part of my future. And in some ways, it would hinder some of the things that I always dreamed of doing or how I dreamed of doing them. And so it's hard to grieve that. And it's hard to grieve that at that point in your life, as you're entering this new decade or chapter, and you just hear about, oh, your 30s are when you have it figured out and, you get to enjoy and this and that. And then I felt like I was entering it in a way that was like, I wouldn't even want this if I was 60 or 70. But then to handle it when I'm approaching 30 was just like, it felt really unfair. And it took a lot of time to grieve that past and also grieve the loss of that future that I thought I was going to have.
And wow, that is so powerful the way that you put it. Not even if you're cancer free, you're not free of cancer. And so now that you are cancer free, claps to that, how have you experienced that in your life now?
Yes. It's a huge, huge blessing to be cancer free. And it's not something that I ever take for granted. And there was so much throughout my journey that has made this moment a lot sweeter. I think a lot of it when I was going through my journey was struggling with accepting it and struggling to find joy because so many things were heavy and so many things were harsh. And so once I was able to work through that during my cancer journey and find small ways to just really appreciate life and my life and find the joys in the smallest things, it made this time of being cancer free so much sweeter because I still have that in me. And so I look at life differently. I look at it as, yes, being more fragile, but also being more beautiful in the day to day and not always focusing on the future or the past, but more so living in the present. And so that's been a beautiful gift as I've navigated being cancer free. It's also hard being cancer free because you're not free of cancer. And so I still have a lot of appointments. I'm still regularly doing checkups. I am very in tune with my body after going through cancer. And so sometimes that's a blessing and sometimes that's a curse. It's really great to notice any changes and be aware of any changes, but you also don't want to live in fear. And that's something that cancer can bring to your life is this state of fear. So working through that is still a journey. It's like being grateful, but also being aware of how close I am to what I'm leaving behind, but not that long ago. And knowing that I still see my doctors and I still do blood work regularly. And sometimes I'll share with friends, like, oh, I have an appointment. And they almost thought like some of that was going to be in the past. They're like, oh, but you're cancer free. So, like, you're done. And it's like, no, I don't have to see my doctors as regularly and I don't have to do scans as regularly, but I will be monitored for life. I found out in November of 2024 that I had a negative mammogram. And so since then, I've just been working in this space of feeling gratitude, but also knowing that it wasn't that long ago and you hear stories, you are exposed to communities where you just know that nothing is a guarantee and that things can change. And so sometimes you go into appointments not even worrying about things, and then something will pop up that will bring you right back to that feeling of anxiety, to that feeling of wanting to protect your body. So, in a lot of ways, I still feel very vulnerable, but it's also hard because I also have this pressure of somewhat finding my new normal post cancer. It's like getting back into the job search and doing all the things that, society pushes you to do and expects of you, and you just have to do for survival, but you're still carrying this weight that sometimes people think isn't as heavy as it is. And it still is heavy. Um, and in certain situations, I almost feel like I have to discount the heaviness because you're supposed to show up as a super hard worker or like you're ready to dedicate your all to this. But you know how important it is to just take care of yourself and you know how important it is to slow down. And I think that balance is still tricky, but it's also just something I am so, so grateful for.
Yeah. And one of the Neema coined terms is season. And
Yes,
in this season, you spoke
in this
about,
season.
yeah, you spoke about gratitude and kind of trying to
Mhm.
find those glimmers of light or joy or hope in the midst of a really dark time. How have you been doing that in this season?
In this season, I am getting better at that vulnerability. Um, I'm getting better at allowing myself to not always show up when I expected myself to show up. And I think that's just goes to scheduling. Life happens, and sometimes I'm like, okay, I'm going to make sure that I don't have too many things this week. And then I may have an appointment that warrants follow ups. So now all of a sudden, I do have more things in a week where I thought it was lighter. But in that week, I already had a job interview. In that week, I already had a commitment with friends or family. And then now I have a medical appointment or two medical appointments that bring their own anxiety. So I'm allowing myself to reschedule things, even if I feel like I should be able to show up for them. And you don't always have to explain the full story as to why, but it's almost a gift to yourself to be like, none of this is as serious as your well being. None of this is more important than you showing up for yourself and doing something kind for your body. And that's still something I'm working through because society conditions us to show up as our best self and, be grateful for any opportunities and just give it your best at all times. And sometimes it's like, no, I'm going to say I can't do this today. I can do it tomorrow or next week. And if it works, it works. And if it doesn't, it wasn't meant to be. But I can't kill myself in the process because I know how fragile and important my life is and my well being is.
Yeah, totally. Making sure that those boundaries are in place, that you're having time
Right.
for yourself, and really being present in your life sounds like it's a major component. And I think through that is also how do you communicate that to others? And I know you did mention your dad and that he was very private with his journey. How have you been showing up in this journey? I mean, doing a podcast tells us a little something, but
Yep.
how do you communicate that to others?
So I decided pretty early on in my journey that I was going to share it on my social media. My reason behind that was I knew that I didn't want to hide it because it was something that was going to be such a large part of my life. And I realized how much I was learning. The fact that when you're overwhelmed with a lot of information, but it's really valuable information that people just may not always be aware of. So I felt like one, I wanted to share it so that I didn't have to live a life that was any different than my actual reality. But I also wanted to share some of the things I was learning because I just, I was one of those people who was unaware and I only knew about it through cancer, but it's stuff that can really help other people and just like increase awareness over cancer in general, breast cancer in young adults. And through that, it was like a huge turning point because I just felt so much support. And I felt like some of what was going on had purpose because I was reaching people and people were sharing their stories with me. People were letting me know that they decided to go to this appointment and then they have a biopsy coming up and then they let me know what the news is, whether it's good. And we are just like on this journey together. But it shows that it was almost like a wake up call, not just for me, but for a lot of people who know me to be like, hey, this can happen. This can happen at any point in your life. And here are some things to look out for. Here are some things that can be helpful. And I even connected with people who could relate to my experience because they had gone through it. Whether they chose to share it publicly or not, it was still a really beautiful moment of connection. And I think that is such a vital part of the cancer experience is having that connection. Whether you choose to do one on one therapy or support groups or try to find people who can relate, it's just really beautiful to be able to share and release and also have other people share as well. And then to know that you're in this with other people who care about you and you're helping other people along their journey. And it's life-saving stuff at the end of the day.
Absolutely. And so many of these things aren't spoken about or they're not. And I think, particularly for the age that you're going through this, and we spoke about that a lot. What are some of the things that you feel need more of a spotlight or more of a microphone held up to them?
I think more things. It was really strange to me how many people were just proud that I even took my concerns to a professional. And they were praising me for doing something that in my mind, I was almost beating myself up over not doing sooner. And it's like you're told to go to the doctor every year, you're told to do these things. And it's really important that you do that, but it's also important that you advocate for yourself in those spaces and that you share all concerns, share all the things, whether they seem embarrassing, whether they seem small, whether it seems like, oh, this may be gone in 24 hours. It's like share it with a professional and make sure that you leave there feeling good. And a lot of times we want to go into spaces where people tell us there's nothing wrong, but it's like if you truly feel like there is, then go and get a second opinion. And I think we need to normalize going to the doctor outside of our annual checkups, outside of, what's forced or recommended or whatever. If you feel a change in your body, it's really important to bring that to one or two or however many until you feel seen. Um, and then it's also just unfortunate because we have insurance restrictions or just different guidelines that are, in place that kind of hinder people from getting the screening that they may need earlier in their life. And so that's another thing too, where sometimes people will talk to me and they're like, "Hey, my doctor said like, oh, this is not necessary," or, "You're under 40, don't do this." And I'm like, if I got diagnosed at 29, what would have happened if I would I have made it to 40, So I think we have to really push that message of listening to your body, advocating for your body, bringing it to professionals, finding a community that supports you and can uplift you, share resources, and also to just overall find a better balance in your life of the commitments that you know you need to do, but also self care, finding your joy, and stepping away from those things. Because when your health is in question, you realize how much those things don't really matter. You need them, but they're not more important than your well being. And so in this space, it's one of those things where I'm like, okay, I'm navigating going back into like societal expectations, but I'm also very aware of the fact that I have to come first. My well being has to come first, and there's no job, there's no commitment, there's nothing that's more important than you showing up for yourself. And so I think that would be my recommendation.
Yeah, and you're touching on such important pieces of this: the access, the advocacy, communication with your medical team. Now that you are in post treatment but still going to these appointments, what has that looked like for you, having that communication with your medical team? And then, kind of a second part of that question, how have you helped to kind of mitigate living in that state of fear?
Mm,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, I want to start with the last one first
Mm-hmm.
about that state of fear, because I think that's a huge thing that you are facing when you're dealing with cancer is just fear. And there's fear of uncertainty and the future and a lot of things. And there were a lot of times throughout my journey where fear won because you are being monitored and you are being advised, and you also know how huge this thing is. And then I got to a point where I was like, faith over fear, where it's like, I'm going to listen to this advice and I'm going to do my best. I'm also going to allow myself to believe that I will be okay and that I don't have to be scared of doing everything that I want to do, or whether it's, getting on a flight. There were a lot of times where I wanted to go and travel and I didn't. I didn't because something came up on, you know, medically, and they were like, "Oh, well, we advise, you stay and you do this additional testing and this and that." And I listened, and I don't regret listening. But then it gets to a point of sometimes you just get on the flight. Sometimes you do the things because you have to trust that you will be okay. And so it's a balance of listening to advice and also just trusting in good outcomes and trusting in your body and your ability to handle things that can happen. And so that was a really big thing for me too. It's really hard when you know how fragile your circumstances are, but you also have to live your life. And to find that balance and find that joy is really important. Um, And also being in this space, I am so grateful that I have a medical team that I feel very comfortable with, that I feel very taken care of. Um, it's such a beautiful process to know how involved these people continue to be in my life. If I have questions or concerns and to know that they're responding so quickly, I'm like, oh my God, I just like sent it off. Wow. Thank you. Or to know that if I do have a concern, they're quick to move with it. They're like, hey, okay. First, they, try to assure me that this could just be something less intense, but they will also schedule the scans or schedule the blood work so that we can get those answers. Because a lot of anxiety comes with not knowing. So knowing comes with answers. And when you have those answers, it's like, okay, I can breathe. Okay, this is not cancer again or cancer related. Um, and so now going into these appointments and being in these spaces, it's strange because I see so many versions of myself, like even just sitting in the waiting room. I see somebody who's very, I don't want to say that they're like physically weak. And you can tell, like, okay, they're probably in an aggressive form of their treatment or aggressive stage of their treatment. And then you see the person who decided to put on makeup and wear a wig today because you know that they just wanted to feel better. And then you just see the different ages, you see the different kind of stages of your journey. And I remember myself in all of those spaces. And so it's like it wasn't that long ago that I was in here just really fed up, not wanting to be here and, you know, all the things. And then now when I go in, I feel lighter because a lot of my reasons for going in are more monitoring rather than treating. And so I don't want to say imposter syndrome, but sometimes it's like you may look at me and sometimes people are like, "You have cancer?" Like they're just like, "You?" And I was like, I did. I very much so. And cancer doesn't look one way. So I can relate to all the different ways that cancer can look and can show up. And sometimes it can feel strange being in those spaces, knowing how much you do connect to those people and we're all in this together. And then you're also feeling, this sense of relief that your days get to at least feel a little lighter because this isn't chemo, this isn't radiation, this isn't surgery. You're here for blood work or you're here for this. I think it's one of those things where it's like you're still very aware of the community that you're a part of and you're aware of the harsh realities that it comes with, and you're still grieving some of those things, and also allowing yourself to feel a little lighter, knowing that in this season and in this space, you are okay, and you hopefully will remain to be okay.
How does it feel for you in this season to look
Mhm.
back over your journey?
Oh, that's a good question. It's surreal in some ways. It's crazy because when you're going through it, you just I mean, you're so in it, and that's all you can really think about. And I going through it, I always thought like I will never forget this. I'll never, you almost feel like you'll never like recover from some of those things. And then even just a few months out, sometimes I'll look back and I'll be like, wow, you did this. Like you went through this. Or sometimes I'll have appointments with new people and they'll go through my medical history and they're like, oh, okay, so we just want to make sure we have everything. So you did this and this, and you just like hearing it back and you like remember the weight of all of it. It's like I did do all those things. And I remember where I was going through this journey. And I remember the lowest of lows. I remember the moments of joy. Um, but it's one of those things that you look back on and you're almost in disbelief of how much you really went through while also remembering how much you went through. It's something that'll always stay with you, but because so many things happen throughout the journey, you can almost forget some some of the things that happened prior because you're constantly in go. Like you're like, okay, what's next? What do I have to do next? And then you take a moment to reflect back and, one, you have to just give yourself your props because you made it through all of those things. And that takes a lot of bravery and courage, and it takes you not giving up on yourself. And so to have that moment of like, I am just so grateful that I'm here. I'm grateful that I made it through these things. But it's also like, wow, I I did go through all these things. And I never thought I would ever forget this, but sometimes you really do have to take a step back and remember the details. And that can be really heavy, but also beautiful because it means that progress was made and growth was made. And to be on the other side of some of those really harsh things is just something I'm always grateful for. Even in the lowest moments, I'm like, I'm here. I'm stressed about this or I'm anxious about this, but like I'm able to feel those things because I'm still here. And that in itself is enough to make me emotional on those days where I'm like, wow, you can so easily fall back into some of the day to day stressors. But then when you have that moment of like, I'm here, I'm alive, I'm feeling this fresh air because I am still here is like a really beautiful grounding moment. And it makes, a lot of parts of the really tough journey worth it.
That is a mantra if I've ever heard one. And this month that we're recording is Survivorship month. What is something that you would tell to a person who is currently going through what you already went through?
I would tell them the importance of feeling your feelings and confronting those feelings because they're not going to go away. You can't sweep them under the rug. You're feeling them because you're going through something that is so life changing and in many ways traumatic. And you have to give yourself the grace to feel the heaviness of that at times. And in those moments, try to remember that there is a positive outcome that can come from this. It may not be what you wanted or when you wanted it, but to keep that hope alive and to believe in the possibility of good things happening to you and a beautiful future can really keep you going. Like, this is your situation right now, but it's not going to be your situation forever. Whether it's just because your mindset changed, whether it's your treatment changed, whether you're free of treatment, it's like to give yourself that moment of feeling like, hey, I'm going to honor my feelings in this moment and I'm going to believe that they won't feel this way forever. And so to keep that possibility of a better future open is really crucial. I also think it's so important to lean on support. It doesn't have to look the way other survivors do it, or you don't have to do things that make you, feel worse about yourself in any way. Sometimes certain recommendations just may not be for you, but to have community through this that you feel comfortable with sharing all the things is really valuable. And to always protect your peace and create your joy. I struggled a lot because I was like waiting on life to get easier. I was waiting on life to get better. I felt like, didn't I do enough or go through enough where like where's my prize? Like where's the part where it's like, okay, you did it. Now here's something good. And it was partially because I was fighting the acceptance piece where I was like, okay, I'm going to do this, but I'm never going to accept the fact that I got cancer because I don't think that it was necessary to my story. I always felt like no lesson that could come from this was enough to like go through something so traumatic. But when you release some of that control of feeling like you have to have the answers or you have to know why this happened and why it happened to you, and just face the fact that it's happening, but there is another side to this. There, there is a different season that you are going to experience. So you have to just keep going and know that you have what it takes to overcome this, but don't feel like you have to do it alone because this is not something that you can do alone.
Your story is just so inspiring and you're so
Thank
eloquent,
you.
and it was really wonderful to have you on this podcast. Is there anything else that you want to add?
I just have so much gratitude for CancerCare and Christina. I looked forward to our sessions for so long and to just feel that sense of support and just to be seen for exactly where I was, but to also just leave me with little tidbits of hope and little ways to maybe reframe the situation that I was dealing with, where it's like you sometimes only see things one way, and that's okay because that's your truth and that's, those are your feelings. But you have to just leave room for the idea that it can get better. And you really have to believe that it can and it will. And that, beautiful things are still present in your life and will continue to come to your life. But this was my turning point. Going to like seek therapy, showing up and being vulnerable, being open, being receptive to what you shared with me was something that I am forever grateful for. And I don't know what my journey would have looked like without this community and this support. So if you're here and you're listening, you're already taking the steps to connect. And I think that's such a beautiful thing. And I urge you to continue doing that, whether it's with CancerCare or with your friends or other support groups. It's just really important to feel like you have a safe space where people are there for you. And I found that with CancerCare and Christina. So I'm just grateful.
Thank you so much. And thank you for being here. I'm so grateful to have been even a small part of your journey. And it has been such a gift to me. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to Cancer Out Loud, the CancerCare podcast. CancerCare is the leading national nonprofit organization providing free professional support services, including resource navigation, cancer-focused counseling, support groups, educational resources, and financial assistance to anyone affected by cancer. You can visit us online at cancercare.org or call our toll-free Hope line at 800-813-HOPE. That's 800-813-4673 to speak with a master's prepared oncology social worker.